Welcome to the True Crime Storyteller. This video contains audio only. If you want to see images from the true crime stories, check out my Instagram account and tap the follow button to stay tuned. In the vast forests of the Pacific Northwest, where the city of Seattle fades into the distance and nature dictates its own laws, a tragedy occurred in the summer of 2003 that would deeply shake the community. This story, which began with the promising dreams of a young woman, would soon unveil the sinister depths of organized crime and inhumane cruelty. As the sun slowly sets over the dense forests and green hills, the horizon loses its gentle slopes in the shadow of evil. The story of Rachel Burkheimer, a young woman whose life was abruptly cut short by the brutal force of the underworld, reminds us of the fragility of our existence and how unexpected tragedy can devastate our lives irreparably. This tragedy unfolded against a backdrop of idyllic nature and an ostensibly peaceful community, where the beauty of the landscape only thinly veiled the dark reality lurking beneath the surface. As the summer months continued and the days grew shorter, a story emerged that would test the very core of the community. What began as a promising and hopeful future for a young woman was marred by the inescapable shadow of violence and crime. In the twilight silence of the forest, where the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves seemed to only interrupt the quiet, Rachel Burkheimer became a symbol of how far human cruelty can reach and how fragile our dreams can be when exposed to the harshness of reality. Rachel Burkheimer grew up in the picturesque suburbs of Seattle, an area that offered its residents a unique blend of the tranquility of nature and the proximity of the city. The green, hilly environment provided a serene backdrop for Rachel's early years. From a young age, she made an impression with her vibrant personality and diverse talents. She had an innate flair for art, reflected in her paintings and drawings, which garnered admiration from family and friends early on. At the same time, she was a passionate athlete, a talent that highlighted her physical strength and perseverance. Rachel's family was a close-knit unit, a vibrant example of camaraderie and support. Her parents, hardworking and involved individuals, were the pillars of her youth. They provided a warm and nurturing environment where Rachel's talents could flourish. Her siblings were not only family, but also best friends, with whom she shared many precious memories. The family was inseparable, a network of support and love that helped Rachel pursue her ambitions. With a strong will and ambitious dreams, Rachel's future seemed full of possibilities. She had concrete plans to further develop her artistic and athletic talents, perhaps even at a professional level. The future ahead of her seemed to promise a path of success and fulfillment. But the ominous shadows of crime, hidden in the corners of her world, would brutally disrupt this promising future. In 2003, a year that would normally bloom with opportunities and promise, Rachel's life took a dark turn. She became entangled in the cruel clutches of organized crime, a world she had only known through hearsay until then. The group she came into contact with was notorious in Seattle for their involvement in violent criminal activities and internal power struggles. This organization had built a sinister reputation, known for their ruthless and brutal behavior. Rachel's involvement with this criminal group seemed, at first, an unprecedented contrast to her previous life. What exactly crossed her path with that of the criminal organization remains partly shrouded in mystery, but it was clear that her entanglement was the result of internal conflicts and power struggles within the organization. Instead of leading a normal life, Rachel was trapped in a spiral of violence and fear, a situation that would cruelly impact her. On August 22, 2003, Rachel, just 18 years old, was abducted by members of this violent group. The exact motives behind her kidnapping were confusing and complex, but the consequences were crystal clear. Rachel was taken from her familiar surroundings and brought to a remote location, a place that provided the perfect backdrop for the horrors that would unfold there. The criminal gangsters, eager to resolve their internal conflicts with brute force, showed no mercy to their victim. The kidnapping and murder of Rachel Burkheimer were imbued with a level of cruelty that defied human understanding. In the early hours of August 22, 2003, when the air was still filled with the chirping of birds and the first signs of dawn, Rachel was taken from her home by a group of men. The gangsters, members of the criminal organization, were determined to express their internal strife in a gruesome manner. The kidnappers transported Rachel to a remote location deep in the woods outside Seattle, a place that seemed forgotten by time. The terrain was difficult to access, with winding paths known only to the most seasoned locals. The forest was a dense wilderness, surrounded by towering pines and lush undergrowth that obstructed any visibility. This isolated terrain provided an undisturbed hiding place for the horrors that would take place there. Upon arrival at this grim location, far from civilization, Rachel was faced with a hopeless situation. The abductors turned the deserted site into their own arena of violence. Rachel was bound with ropes and gagged with duct tape, leaving her completely at their mercy. The men, showing no form of compassion, began a brutal series of beatings. Rachel was repeatedly struck with metal bars and wooden sticks, leading to severe injuries and fractures. Her assailants combined physical pain with psychological terror. They constantly threatened further violence and made false promises of help or rescue. These methodical beatings were designed not only to break her body, but also her spirit. During long periods of isolation, Rachel was left alone in the darkness of the forest. The only sounds she heard were the whispers of the wind through the trees and her own fearful breathing. The desolation and despair she must have felt were overwhelming. Her only company was the shadows of the trees and the icy cold of the night. After hours of brutal assault, with her pleas lost in the wilderness's silence, Rachel was eventually killed. The details of her death were so horrific that they left the community in a state of disbelief and sorrow. Her death was a gruesome demonstration of power and fear, executed with a merciless precision that underscored the violent nature of her attackers. Following the discovery of Rachel's body, an intensive search and prolonged investigation began. The circumstances of her death made the investigation particularly complex. The remote terrain and the difficulty of gathering physical evidence were significant obstacles. Nonetheless, authorities managed to gather crucial clues and testimonies that led to the arrest of the main suspects. The arrests were a turning point in the case. The justice system faced the challenge of not only holding the perpetrators accountable, but also uncovering the horrifying details of their crimes. During the court trial, the gruesome details of Rachel's kidnapping and murder were revealed. Testimonies from survivors and accomplices, along with forensic evidence, exposed the systematic cruelty with which the defendants had acted. The trial presented a disturbing picture of the reality within these criminal networks. Descriptions of Rachel's final moments and the methods of her abuse added significant emotional weight to the courtroom. The public and media were deeply engaged in the case, and outrage grew as the horrific details emerged. The trial resulted in the conviction of several involved individuals, with severe penalties for the main suspects. The convictions highlighted the severity of organized crime and the devastating impact of such crimes on individuals and their families. Rachel Burkheimer is remembered as a young woman with a promising future who was tragically robbed of her life. Her story has led to greater awareness of the dangers of organized crime and the need for effective law enforcement and prevention. Her death remains a poignant example of the devastating consequences of violence and crime on young lives. The case of Rachel Burkheimer reminds us of the necessity to remain vigilant against the forces of crime and to continue fighting for justice for victims of such horrific acts. It is a lasting reminder of the dark reality of organized crime and the need to persist in the fight for justice and safety in our communities. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.